Thank you so much for joining CNBC.
My pleasure.
I want to kick off by asking you, where are we today? Is Qatar ready?
Qatar is on the path that it set for itself over 10 years ago. So in terms of stadiums, we've got 3 or 4 stadiums ready. Khalifa Stadium, Al Janoub Stadium, and Qatar Foundation Stadium are ready. By the first quarter of this year, actually, we'll have 2 more stadiums coming online. And by the end of 2021, we'll have all stadiums in place. In terms of infrastructure, I mean, if anybody followed the Club World Cup, you can see that the metro system is up and running and operational. We have the expressways and all the relevant infrastructure in terms of transportation being ready. And by the end of this half of this year, 2020, all relevant infrastructure for the transportation will be ready. Infrastructure for ICT is all in place. And now we're moving on to the operational stage. So the Club World Cup 2019 was our first milestone, testing our operational plans. We've got the Club World Cup in 2020 to continue further develop our operational plans. And by 2022, we'll be ready to host the world in the first Middle Eastern World Cup.
There are a lot of people who said you weren't going to be able to get it done. What's your message to those folks today?
From day one, we never really paid attention to a lot of the naysayers. We knew exactly what we needed to do. We were very confident of our capabilities and our ability. We were confident of our ability not only to host the tournament, which was, if you will, the first level of achievement, but more importantly in ensuring that we utilize this tournament as a powerful tool, transformative for the people of our region and for our region generally speaking. And we've worked diligently from day one to ensure that we make the most out of it, whether in terms of delivering on our promise of being the first carbon neutral tournament. So a lot of the projects that we committed to are being delivered at a grander scale. So one example is the solar farms that we committed to during our bid stage. It was a 100 megawatt or 150 megawatt solar farm. Just a few days ago, the Ministry of Energy announced an 800 megawatt solar farm that will be operational in 2020. Our method of construction for our stadiums is sustainable. The stadiums themselves are very efficient, both in terms of water consumption, energy consumption, and so on. On the human side, on the social side, we're delivering on our promises.
When you think about what happens next with regards to the region, so many people that we've been speaking to have been concerned about the volatility, whether it be in the oil market, in the energy market, or of course in terms of security. What is the thing that you find in terms of the challenge there? Because it's difficult to predict these kinds of events, and at the same point, it does have a massive impact on folks' willingness to travel to the region.
I think a lot of it is also, more importantly, perception. I mean, first, it's important to note that Qatar is one of the safest nations in the world, and I think definitely the safest nation in the region. Major sporting events it's also up to us to utilize it as an opportunity to bring people together. I mean, if you look at, for example, the Club World Cup 2019, when we hosted it, we had people from 5 different continents, fans, supporters from different parts of the world coming in, engaging, celebrating. It was a festivity. It was a true festivity. For a period of 10 days, you had people walking down the streets wearing the headgear, the Qatari headgear from Brazil, from Mexico, from Liverpool. There's a certain joy, there's a certain spark that major tournaments, and especially football and the World Cup, can bring people together in. And I think what we've done, and we're working very hard to ensure, is that people appreciate that powerful tool that we have in bringing people together. In an age where divisiveness, nationalism is on the rise, I think the more that we utilize these platforms that showcase our common humanity and bring people together and bring us together to celebrate, even if it's a small little spark, but I think it's a very valuable spark that we need to work towards.
Building on that theme, in terms of what's happening today in the region, obviously the blockade of Qatar by nations like Saudi Arabia and the UAE is ongoing.
Yes.
Do you expect the Saudis and the Emiratis to play?
Well, I mean, the perfect live example is just before the Club World Cup, we hosted the Gulf Cup, the Arabian Gulf Cup. The Saudi national team played, the Emirati national team played, the Bahraini national team played. More than that, we had fans from these nations coming and supporting their teams. In the Club World Cup, we had a Saudi team, Al Hilal, joining us and playing. And we had some fans, maybe not many, but a lot of fans coming in from Saudi as well, supporting the club.
Are World Cup fans from the UAE and Bahrain and Saudi Arabia welcome in Qatar?
everybody's welcome in Qatar. You know, again, just going back to the issue of the blockade, we haven't imposed any restrictions on anybody to come to the World Cup, and we're a nation that believes in resolving conflict through dialogue and finding peaceful means to resolving points of difference. And more importantly, we appreciate the value of sports. We appreciate the power of sports in bringing people together and building bridges. The Gulf Cup was a fantastic example. The first time the Bahrain wins the tournament, we had about 2,000, 3,000 Bahraini fans cheering on their team against the Saudi national team. We had Saudi fans cheering on their team as well. And at the coronation, when His Highness handed the cup to the Bahraini national team, you should see the celebration. There's an emotion. There's a very powerful tool that I think a lot of people underestimate, or a lot of people see it as fleeting. But I think it's upon all of us to try to make the most out of it. Not just the World Cup, but all major sporting events, to make the most out of it as truly being transformational and something that leaves a legacy, not just only for us in the immediate time being, but more importantly for generations to come.
Walk me through the numbers in terms of how many people you're expecting and how much this is actually going to cost at the end of the day. What's going to be your final price tag, do you think, for this event? Because it's a massive, massive undertaking.
Of course, but let me address the price tag first, the question in relation to the cost. From day one, when we bid to host the World Cup, we ensured, as I said, to utilize this tournament as a catalyst for positive change, and more importantly, also a catalyst for the nation to achieve its development goals. So we looked at the country's plans for development, infrastructure, and so on, and we imposed the World Cup plans on top of it, rather than developing infrastructure plans for the World Cup. So every plan that's come into play, the metro system, the expressways, all this, was not designed or developed exclusively for the World Cup, but rather the World Cup accelerated these initiatives. At the end of 2022, these developments are going to continue delivering on the country's overall development plans and the overall 2030 development goals. So every cost that we mentioned today that's related to these is not a cost associated or attributed to the World Cup. It's a cost that's attributed to the country's overall development. So the number that was put forward was $200 billion. But that's a $200 billion invested in the country's overall development. In relation to the World Cup itself, the stadiums, the infrastructure relating to the World Cup itself is $6.7 billion. Now, important to note, each stadium has a story beyond 2022. Each stadium has a use beyond 2022. The capacity of the stadiums will be brought down to 20,000 seats for us to utilize as we need. The modular seats that make up the excess capacity will be donated to developing nations. And one of our stadiums is completely demountable. So the entire stadium is designed in such a way that it's set up, for lack of a better description, as a Lego. It'll be set up, it's been inspired by shipping containers. At the end of the tournament, it'll be disassembled, recycled for further use, donated to developing nations, and the land itself will go back to the government for further investment.
So sustainable.
Sustainable.
When you think about what happens next with regards to the conversations surrounding your bid, your initial hoopla, I guess you could say, and when you think back on that time, how would you address the folks who were so negative on Qatar's getting the World Cup? So obviously it's been an opportunity for growth for Qatar.
Oh, absolutely.
In many ways.
Absolutely.
You're going to be welcoming a whole lot of people from around the world. Do you believe that this is a catalyst, perhaps, to ending the blockade?
Well, I mean, as I said, we, in terms of whether the blockade ends or not as a result of the World Cup, isn't something that I can comment on. What I can comment on is saying simply that we do not politicize sports, and we ensure to use every platform that enhances integration, that enhances dialogue. Sports is one of the most powerful ones. Football in the World Cup, in my opinion, my personal humble opinion, is the most powerful one, and that's what we're working on. Now, when it comes to the negative naysayers early on, look, I think every nation that hosted a major tournament always suffered from critics. Whether you look at 2010 South Africa, whether you look at London 2012.
But they said you guys cheated. I mean, do you feel like they were giving you a hard rap?
Because there's a lot of reasons behind it. There's a lot of stories behind it, and I think a lot of it's been reported on. There were people, sinister people behind it. There were some people that didn't know about us, and so it was very easy to say, it's a small nation. We don't think it has a football history, so how could it win? But 10 years on, today, the reason I can look at people today and say, look, the promises that we made, everything that we talked about, everything that people assumed was just an imagination or empty promises, is being delivered on the ground today. In terms of worker welfare reforms, this is one of the first tournaments that is actually creating social change on the ground. Not only locally, when we're talking about worker welfare reforms, whether it's introducing minimum wage, the abolition of exit permits in the country, the kafala system coming to an end, the work that the Supreme Committee has done that's put it on a global standard, recruitment fees. Globally, recruitment fees is a scourge when it comes to migrant workers. By 2020, we will be reimbursing about 45,000 workers, around about $30 million, in cooperation with contractors who voluntarily joined this scheme. I think the only other company that matches us or surpasses us is Apple, who's done it over 7 years. We've done it over 3 years, and there's more to go. So even when it comes to worker welfare reforms, we're not just performing on the ground that's limited to our own immediate environment, but we're also looking at elements and issues that are global, and we're also creating benchmarks globally. And this is as a direct result of a football tournament. And I think that's where I feel very proud, because I think people have not truly appreciated what these tournaments can truly achieve. Even though a lot of tournaments have been very successful and they've set the path, and they've been our benchmarks, but I think we will be setting the standard for legacy and sustainability of hosting major tournaments.
When you think about the cultural aspect of this, there were a lot of conversations initially about, how will they be able to host a World Cup? We're talking about alcohol, we're talking about, European fans specifically. What has changed, in your view, with regards to that in the last 10 years? Because there were a lot of conversations about, are we going to have hotels, alcohol only is in hotels, or are we going to do this outside of it? What have you guys done to address that? Because that was certainly a concern.
The example is the 2019 Club World Cup. We always talked about and promised about fan zones being able to, offer alcohol. Alcohol will be offered in limited areas, not in open areas, because alcohol is not part of our culture, but hospitality is. And that's what we did. In 2019, in December, we had a fan zone that served alcohol. I think it was £5 a beer or something. And people were able to enjoy, celebrate. It was a great festivity. And they were able to, people were festive, in the malls, outside, in Souk Waqif, one of our traditional souks. And there was a great interaction between the local community, both expat and Qataris, as well as the visitors that came from outside. And it was truly a great festive moment it combined the different cultures.
So you're not concerned?
No. Look, there's always going to be a moment where people will always be apprehensive, right? Everybody's going to be apprehensive. But once the ice is broken, and the ice was broken in 2019 with the fans, once the ice is broken, people really see this as a unifying platform. People really see this as a place where, regardless of backgrounds, we can come, we can have different opinions, we can have different backgrounds, we can see life differently, but we can still celebrate our common humanity and appreciate and respect the differences between us. And that, I think, is essential. And that is, I think, one of the most powerful tools that tournaments can have. And the perfect example is Russia 2018.
Okay, you're going to have to give me a call. Who's going to win the World Cup?
Look, you've got some very good teams. I think England has got a very good chance. They've got a very, very young, very great potential from England. France has still got a very young team as well, so they can I think still deliver. You can never ignore Brazil. So I think a couple of usual suspects, but I really
You're not
think
rooting for the home team.
Qatar. Look, we're the Asian champions, but if I was to say that we were going to win the World Cup, I'd be, we've got a very good chance of going very far in the tournament. I mean, don't forget, we're the Asian champions, breaking all records on our journey to being Asian champions. I think we will put forward a very good team, but I do think England has put a lot of investment, and they've got a very, very good apparatus to support that team.
I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much for joining CNBC.
Thank you.